Well, hello everyone to our latest Faroes Shetland Research Symposium and Islands Matter webinar. It's a kind of combo that we're having today. And I'm very pleased to tell you we're going to be talking about folklore, the research that's being undertaken into Shetland and Faroese folklore. So, I'm going to talk about some Shetland folklore research that I've done, and then Jóan Pauli Joensen, who's joining us from the Faroe Islands, is going to talk about some of the Faroese folklore, which is very similar to, as I think we'll see, to the Shetland folklore. And then we'll have a chance to chat to each other about our research. And of course, you'll be able to ask questions as well. So we'll be looking at the chat and Q&A as time goes on, to find out what it is that you want to know more about. Now, the Faroes Shetland Research Symposia have been going on for a couple of years now, and the recordings are all available on the Institute for Northern Studies website. And there's a whole range of interesting topics because there's some really fascinating research being undertaken in the two archipelagos. So after this, take the opportunity to go onto the web pages and have a look at some of the recordings for some of the other material that's been done. Now, the webinars were originally set up as an opportunity for researchers, both in Shetland and in the Faroe Islands, to find out what was happening in the other archipelago, so that there might be an opportunity for cross-cultural, international research across the North Atlantic. So in that vein, we'll now move on to some of the folklore research that has been undertaken. And I'm going to start because you might sort of wonder why I'm sort of perched the way I am. But I'm in my bed having, just had some surgery on my knee. So Jóan is happily letting me go first. So I'm going to tell you about, in this short talk, the rich trove of material collected by several generations of folklorists from the beautiful island of Fetlar. Now, for those who don't know, Fetlar lies on the eastern side of Shetland, a mere 48 hours sailing time from the Norwegian coast. It covers 39 square kilometres, which is about half the size of Guernsey, for those who are in the know, and is thus the fourth largest island in the Shetland archipelago. Now, the tales and folklore from this island comprise the most comprehensive and arguably the most representative collection of material which makes up Shetland's rich storytelling tradition. And as anyone who has visited Fetlar will affirm, this is ironic, as at the present time the island has suffered severe depopulation and is now one of Shetland's least inhabited places. There are only 48 inhabitants, well, at least there were when I first wrote these notes, a stark contrast to 1841, when the census recorded a healthy 761. There are more stories from the island than there are people. According to local tradition, this state of affairs was prophesied in the 19th century by a now unidentified elderly woman who predicted that there will be a mansion on the ripples, soldiers on Vord Hill, a harbour in Papal water, and nothing but a shepherd and his dog. In some ways, Fetlar is a Shetlandic version of Blasket Moor, the great Blasket Island in Ireland, an important cultural landscape almost devoid of people. Fetlar has long had a reputation as a place with a rich folklore heritage, and the Faroese scholar Jakob Jakobsen, who visited Shetland at the end of the 19th century on a mission to research Norse cultural survivals in the dialect and folklore, was surprised that so much information had survived on the island. And another great Scandinavian scholar with a deep and abiding interest in Shetland, the Swede Bo Almqvist, said of Fetlar that it was the richest and legendary tradition of the Shetland Islands. And from the 1950s onwards, Fetlar was almost a place of pilgrimage for the scholars of the School of Scottish Studies. For example, Alan Bruford made good use of Fetlar material in his excellent study of Shetlandic fairies. Alan and others interviewed and recorded extraordinary storytellers like Jamesy Lawrenson and Catherine Mary Anderson. Jamesy, pictured here, was born and raised in Aith, Fetlar, in 1899, where he was a registrar, writer, fisherman, and crofter. And he was a legend in his own lifetime, and many stories, some true, others apocryphal, were told about him. Catherine was born on the island in 1886 and spent her life crofting there, and has some stories from both of them today. Let's begin with historical legends. Shetland, as a whole, has few, presumably because of the impact of language change in the 18th century. However, Fetlar does have two stories, which can with confidence be regarded as authentic survivals of Old Norse legendary material. The first is associated with the settlement of the township of Finney on the east coast. Finney is in origin a Norse place name, meaning something like the place to head to or the found place. And it's related to the Faroese place name Funningur, where Grimur Kamban, the Faroese, legendary first settler, is said to have settled. According to the 18th century old statistical account, there's a place on the eastmost angle of the island called Finney, which signifies the place first found out. And the 19th century native Shetland scholar Lawrence Williamson of Mid Yell, in his notes, recorded the following tradition, still current in his time in the late 19th century. The first Danish vessel that came to Shetland cast a spell overboard at the bow and noticed it passing to the stern. They came to Finney, but didn't find it very good, and went round to Strand to the Northwick. This story seems to be Shetland's only surviving landnam or land-taking story, a genre of such great importance in medieval Iceland. The second legendary story, with Old Norse origins, concerns a certain Jan Tate. Jacob Jakobsen collected this version from an old fisherman called Thomas Tate, whom he describes as a man of most vivid power of narrative, and the last who could tell the remarkable old story of Jan Tate and the bear. I'll tell you the complete story, because you hear different versions in different places. The king of, excuse me, the King of Norway sent his chamberlain across to Shetland to collect the scat, due to the crown. The chamberlain came to Fetlar, where the scat was collected at Uri. To Uri, the Udalers came with their teens or tithes they had to pay. They brought with them their bismers. These bismers were ancient wooden steelyards. The chamberlain, of course, had his own bismer, which was considered the standard weight, and on which he tested the Udalers' bismers. An Udaler by the name of Jan Tate, while paying his butter teend, was accused by the chamberlain of having a false bismer. This at once led to a quarrel, in which Tate denounced the chamberlain's bismer as false, and being threatened by the chamberlain, Jan finally raised his bismer and struck the king's representative dead on the spot. This, of course, was a great crime, for which he was summoned to appear before the king in Norway. Arriving there, Jan went in before the king, bareheaded and barefooted, and carrying an axe in his hand. Jan was a strongly built man and had big knobs on the joints of his feet. So the king stared at his feet until Jan suddenly asked him why he was staring so fixedly. The king said he'd never seen such strange feet before. Jan said that if he gave him any offence, he would soon cure that, whereupon he took the axe and hewed off one of the knobs. The king said that he didn't at all wonder that Jan had killed the chamberlain, since he had so little regard for his own flesh and blood. But seeing his courage, he would give him one chance to save his life. There was a bear infesting a certain place, and constantly endangering the lives of the inhabitants. If he could catch it and bring it alive before the king, he would be pardoned. Tate then went to an old woman who lived near a spot the bear used to frequent, and asked her all about its ways and habits. She said to him, "By butter you have got into the present trouble, and by butter you shall get out of it." Then she advised him to take a kit full of butter and place it in an open spot in the forest, where the bear used to come. Watch there till the bear appeared on the scene and lick the butter, and then, when it had laid down to sleep, seize his opportunity and bind it in ropes. Tate acted according to her advice. The bear, after having licked the butter, felt heavy, lay down and fell asleep, whereupon Tate, who had been watching, hastened to tie the animal with strong ropes. He managed to bring the bear alive before the king, but the king, wanting to get rid of him, ordered him out of his sight, bidding him to take the bear home with him to Shetland. Tate went back to Fetlar with the bear and transported it from there to the island of Jellilinga off the Yell coast, where there's a spot still called the Bear's Bait, which name is known by very few people today. There's a green circle in the island said to have been made by the bears walking around the pole to which it was tethered. Now, great story, but there's more to it than that. Bo Almqvist devotes time to this tale in his study of the uglier foot stories, and he points out shared motifs with some early Norse tales, such as the slaying of the king's representative, which occurs in Ráðhúsþáttur, and adventurous encounters with wild beasts, such as the story of Auðun and the polar bear in Auðunarþáttur Vestfirska. And there's a particular similarity between the Jan Tate and the story told by Snorri Sturluson about Thorarin Nifjolsson in St. Olaf's saga, who also had ugly feet. He had a run-in with the irascible King Olaf. However, unlike Jan, who had to deal with a bear, Thorarin had to defeat King Hrörekr Dagsson of Hedmark, whom he then had to take back to Iceland. Now, these stories are so alike that they surely have a common origin in the medieval Norse period. The Shetland version of the story must be a little memory of this story from St. Olaf's saga. As one would expect of a traditional farming and fishing society, which, when it still existed in Fetlar, was exceptionally poor and insecure by modern standards, belief in magic and in a menacing supernatural world was strong. And Jakobsen recorded the word granderi, an old Shetland word for witchcraft from the island. And this word clearly had evil connotations, and he also recorded the verb to grand, to hurt by magic, from the same Old Norse root as granda, meaning to hurt or damage. And the survival of many supernatural folk and migratory tales is evidence for the strength of belief in magic. There are tales about dangerous spiritual beings, which inhabited both land and sea, and tales about that other half of the magical moiety, witches, always threatening life and fertility. Supernatural beings come in a variety of sizes, from periodicals to giants, like the giant and his wife who dragged an island from Yell Sound to Fetlar, with the intention of building a harbour at the Wick of Gruting. However, pieces kept breaking off, creating many of the stacks around the coast. And there's a close similarity here with the Faroese tale of the giant Rúsin and his wife Shetlandic, who unsuccessfully attempted to drag the Faroe Islands to Iceland. They were turned to stone and remain as stacks at Eiskotler. Jakobsen lists the name of another Fetlar stack as the stack of Gurastein, the stack of the Gur's stone. And the word Gur comes from Old Norse Gygur, a giantess or hag. And there are many in Shetland. There were many of these Gurs in Shetland at one time, and they were often also called Grullies, from Grilla. And there was a saying that parents used to say to their children, which was recorded on the island of Foula, and which presumably also was heard in Fetlar, which stated, "Bide in, or the Uli Grully will take thee." So stay in, or the evil Grilla will get you. There are stories about supernatural beings on land and in the seas. So let's have a quick look at more of the land beings first. From Fetlar, there's a version of the migratory tale, Fairies Send a Message. Given a code number, if you like these things, ML6070, which is common in Scandinavia. This here is Lawrence Williamson's 19th century version, which is localised at the croft of Taft in Finney. A Fetlar lad was riding one night on a red mare with a grey foal from the West Isle to Taft in Finney. Some say that he was going sweethearting, some that he had been in Uri with fish. When he went to Stackaberg, he heard a voice saying, "Trira rara gonga, do it rides the red and rends the grey, Tell du tu, I can't even say it myself. Tell du tuna tivla at funa fivla is fan in the fire and brunter. And when he came into Taft, the goodman's daughters were going into the byre to meet the kye, and one carried the straw and the other a lamp. The lad repeated the words that he'd heard, and a trow was milking the cows in the byre, and when she heard them, she flung her copper pan and fled screaming, Care and Dule, that's my bairn at Stackaberg. People say the pan is still in the house, and some say built into the wall, and the family never afterwards lacked milk. Now, Williamson also knew a version from one of these sources where the second character fell into the water instead of the fire. And it said, Tell Tuna Tivla at Nuna Nivla as Velana Vatnya, or as fallen in the water. Vatnya is Norn and is exactly equivalent to Norwegian Vatna, the water. Now, it's fascinating that no version of this tale has been recorded on mainland Scotland. Versions only occur in the Northern Isles. However, some 70 versions have been recorded in Norway from west to north. There are even Sami versions. And Inger Boberg noted in the monograph Sagne om den store Pan's død, the story of the great Pan's death, that the Shetland versions, including those from Fetlar, bear a close resemblance to versions from northern Scandinavia. Similarities included the variation that the child fell into water, and the fact that the fairy received the message in a byre, and a copper pan also appeared in a version from Vega in Haulogaland, which suggests a cultural connection between Shetland and northern Norway, in addition to those recognised connections to Vestlandet directly over the sea. Fetlar has its own magic mountain, which I've already just mentioned, actually a low hill called Stackaberg, and this is where the Trows seem to live, and there are a number of Trow stories connected to it, and there's a connection with the Faroes as well, because according to a tale told by Yimsey Lawrenson, an old Trow, the last in Fetlar, was discovered in a cave on Stackaberg. They met an old pick or trow in the underground place in Stackaberg, and they asked her where was the rest of them, and she said that they had a clear out of the place with James Ingram. They couldn't stand the prayers of James Ingram. They were supposed to go to Faroe, left Shetland, and went to Faroe. James Ingram is a historical figure. He was an influential 19th century religious leader, and John Nicholson has a variant of this story, but he sets it in a knowe or mound near the Burn of First in North Yell. Fetlar and North Yell belong to the same parish. This story is related to stories common in Scandinavia about fairies leaving because they couldn't bear the sound of church bells, and stories about notable preachers being insufferable to the devil and such like beings, such as the story about Bishop Svedberg of Skara in Västra Götaland in Sweden. Fetlar, as well as having a fairy mountain, has a number of strange prehistoric stone settings as well, like the Halte dance circle, supposed to be dancers turned to stone in a very troll-like fashion, and the Finnegert, a Neolithic or Bronze Age dike, which divides the island in half. Jakobsen suggested the name of this ancient dike commemorated another supernatural people, the Finns. Finns were known in Shetland to be magic workers, and in 1899 John Spence noted, even in recent times, persons who were marked as being particularly lucky, and those who were supposed to be skilled in the black art, were spoken of as Norway Finns. Now, the Finnegert Dyke was clearly associated in people's minds with the supernatural. The good man, Colbin's Taft, in the northwest of Fetlar, didn't have a sufficiently good dike around his property to keep away the sheep, which broke in continually and destroyed his corn. And one night, when he went to bed, he expressed the wish that a dike sufficient to keep off the troublesome animals might be standing in the morning. And when he awoke, even if he should give his best cow for it. Next morning, when he went out, he found a splendid new dike standing where he had wished, and at the same time his best cow had disappeared from the byre. The Finns had done it. Now, Finns tended in the tales to be closely associated with the sea. For example, according to one story, a Norway Finn came across from Norway, catching fish as he went, and when he approached Fetlar, he noted a particularly good fishing ground. Unfortunately, a storm blew up, and the Finn was blown into the Wick of Finney, where at the last minute he was rescued by an eighth man. The exhausted Finn, in thanks, told him of the wonderful fishing ground, and promised, "Ye may hae a tired back and a heavy hand, but never a fair hurt or a town boat." And so it was. Eighth's Deep became Eighth's Bank, and no life was ever lost going to or coming from this ground. Another story, which connects the Finns with the sea and fishing, tells of a Finn in Norway made a bet with a man from Eighth that he wouldn't taste or have fresh fish before Yule in his skio. That's the fish drying shed. The man caught a fish and was about to win his bet when he was nearly killed by a huge wave. This turned out to be the Finn metamorphosized. And here's the story. An eighth man went to Norway. He met a Finn while he was there, who made him a wager that he would neither taste fish nor have fresh fish in his skio before Yule. The winter that year was so stormy that the eighth man couldn't go to sea even to catch bait, so it looked as if he was going to lose the wager. However, on Tamaseen, the weather broke. As he had no bait, the Fetlar man dyed a rag in blood from his own foot and used that. It proved to be effective, because he caught an ollick, a youngling. However, as he headed back to shore, the sea arose and threatened to swallow the boat. He used oil from a small keg to smooth the surface of the sea, but as he was crossing the string of the mini-stack, a terrible wave came rolling behind him. He seized the oil keg and threw it into the face of the wave, and thereby managed to make land. On his return to Norway, the eighth man visited the Finn and reminded him of their wager, and the Finn pointed to a deep scar on his brow and his broken teeth, and replied, "I'm paid dear and euch for that ollick. Thou didna only smore me with that oil, but solve me with that oily yoke." The Finn's connection with the sea and his ability to metamorphose connects these tales to much earlier references. The 12th century Historia Norwegiae, the history of Norway, tells a story about how a Finn, actually a Sami, sent his spirit out to accomplish a task in the form of a whale. And the saga of Halfdan Eysteinsson tells how, in a battle, Fjordr, king of the Finns, turned himself into a battle walrus. So there's a battle walrus, just to check everybody's still awake. Metamorphosis into a seal was not only the preserve of Norway Finns, it was also believed that sea mammals could be local witches in disguise. Catherine Mary Anderson told a tale about a witch who attempted to attack a fisherman while in the form of a seal. An old woman called Minnie, who was supposed to be a witch, lived with her daughter and her husband. And all the fishermen are in great fear of her and gave her fish, except for one old skipper who thought it was nonsense. One morning he had a row with her, and after the lines were set, he told his crew they could sleep while he had a smoke. He saw a large seal heading straight for the boat and smashed the animal with a ricker. He woke the crew to haul the lines, and as they headed in, told them about his row with the old woman. And when they came ashore, they met the old woman's daughter. The skipper said he'd seen Minnie and asked how she was. She claimed she'd fallen over the yard dike and broken her leg. The skipper said it was a pity it wasn't her neck. In an actual witchcraft trial from Shetland in 1644, a certain Marion Pardon was accused of, amongst other crimes, taking the shape of a porpoise, and attacking fishermen in a boat. She was found guilty and executed at Scalawa. It seems a reasonable hypothesis that it was in the Northern Isles, where humans becoming seals doesn't seem to have surprised people very much, that the famous Selkie stories and migratory tales originated. Tales told about mermaids, probably coming north from the Gaelic West, got entangled with stories about seals, and mermaids became Selkie wives. The migratory tale, the seal woman, known as ML 4080, spread to Kalsoy and the Faroes, to Iceland, and the Lofoten Islands in Norway. And we have a version of the seal wife story from Fetlar, told by Catherine Mary Anderson. A man was walking around the banks when he came across a girl combing her hair. He saw what he thought was a skin behind her and grabbed it. She asked for it back, but instead he took her home and married her. And later on, a little boy told her he'd seen a fine-looking thing hidden in a corn screw, and she took down the screw and found her skin. As her husband returned home from the fishing in his boat, he saw 2 seals coming from the shore, and he turned to his crew and said, "This night I'm a widower, for that's my wife that's gone there." There were other strange things in the seas around Fetlar. Fishermen feared that evil forces intended to do them harm by upturning their boats and drowning them. They were terrified by frightening monsters like the alarming brigdi, which chased the Fetlar crew in the 1840s, and the terrible 3-humped creature seen 28 miles east-southeast of Fetlar in June 1882. It was 150 feet long, it had a huge head covered with barnacles as large as herring barrels, and a prodigious square mouth. Now, of course, fishermen were also fearful of local women, who might have a grudge against them and turn out to be metamorphosed witches, or witches who could use other means, such as the use of imitative magic, to destroy them. And I've got a long story here, which I'm not going to tell, but they were very feared of witches. And of course, it was not just at sea that witches worked their magic. As a traditional subsistence society, whose worldview included belief in the theory of limited good, people were always worried that their neighbour's good fortune was a result of witchcraft, possibly at their expense. And the belief that witches could steal the profit from milk or butter was deeply embedded in Shetland. James E. Lawrenson told an interesting story about a named person who was briefly involved in this type of witchcraft, but then felt guilty and desisted. This is Kirsty Ganson, who received 2 magic stones, which allowed her to steal milk and butter. The following story is typical of the witchcraft beliefs of the old days, concerns a devout woman from Colbin's Taft in Fetlar, Christian Ganson, known as Kirsty, who married a lonesome man from Hui, one of the survivors of the Diana tragedy. Before she left for the south of the isle, an old woman gave her a yellow butterstone and a white milkstone, which she could use with a ritual or spell in hard times to get these things. These had been given to the old women's folk by the Picts or Trows. Kirsty was to heat the stone and cool it in water before giving it 3 times sunwise, then point with tongs in the direction of a good cow, while saying, "Tak a fe until a is teen, white milk bladi from da bean." So, take all from until all is taken, white milk below you from the bone. To block the spell again, she was to turn the stones against the sun. A few years late afterwards, after she'd been in Hooby Township and the owner of a very indifferent cow, she decided to try the stones. She cast the spell and started churning milk. She hadn't churned long before she realised the spell was working. And a day or 2 after that, the woman whose butter she had stolen, who had 2 young bairns to feed, announced to the township that she was going to the minister to have the witch laid before the kirk session. She exempted the fine young woman who'd moved to the township, who simply wouldn't do such a thing. Next day, Kirsty buried the 2 stones deep in the yard and renounced witchcraft. She told the story to James E. Lawrenson's grandmother and swore it was true until her dying day. So, a huge amount of folklore material from Fetlar, a lot of material of Old Norse origin, folklore associated with everyday life on the land, and folklore associated with fishing and the dangers at sea. And just to finish off, the rich folklore of Fetlar reveals a world only recently departed. A woman, a life that was hard, and you needed every conceivable way of ensuring that life could progress. And I just wanted to show you this little example of the huge amount of material that we've lost. We have a lot of folklore material from Fetlar, but it's only a tiny fragment of what must have been. And of course, before Norn was lost, there was a huge amount of material in Norn itself. And Jakob Jakobsen, he collected quite a bit of material from Fetlar, including this little Norn saying about a crow and a crab. And in his own unusual orthography, which is we're not quite sure how to pronounce it, but we'll give it a go. We have krabbe, krabbe, comma, lende, ave, rig, riva, mug, scaljene, riva, dug, now trotso, krabbe, jonsa, trottlus, which has been interpreted as crab, crab, come ashore. Oh, I doubt that you will grab my back. I won't grab you. No, not at all, said the crab. You are so faithless. So it's a tiny little example of what has been lost from Fetlar. So there we go. Plenty of material there to think about. And I will stop sharing. And I would like to pass over to Jóan Pauli for some authentic Faroese folklore.
Yes. Yes, hello. I'm trying to talk a little about special issues about Faroese water being in Faroese folklore. There's a sporadic information about folklore in the first old local literature about the Faroe Islands. But it was not until the latter part of the 19th century that Hammershaimb, the father of the current Faroese written language, and the philologist Jacob Jakobsen we heard so much of, also well known in Shetland context, published the real accounts of Faroese folklore. This material has since been published, supplemented to some extent by various local historian accounts. The Faroese Museum focused mostly on material culture and on the archaeological excavation. But Fróðskaparsetur, now the University of the Faroe Islands, established in 1965, had one of the first projects was an ethnological and folkloristic documentation, a collection. This was mainly due to the influence of the Irish professor of Faroese folklore, Diarmus O'Dwyer, who participated in a Viking Congress in the Faroe Islands just that summer. And a collection committee was established, and several Faroese students, young students, got summer jobs as collectors all over the Faroes. Among them, I was myself. 130 years ago, in 1891, Hammershaimb wrote that even in the Faroes, the natural surroundings with their phenomena also here in these islands have stirred the Nordic spirits of the people so that the imagination has led life to the dead surroundings, peopled them locally with supranational and a phantom of supernormal beings, dwarfs, uldafolk, hidden people, elves, that wander unseen among human beings on land and on sea, but who can also appear as wicked, tempting creatures offering a drink something, to charm human beings away from the world it has been placed in. He also mentioned pixies in the home, water spirits in streams and lakes, mermen, and Neagris is a special dead child being, which Bo Almqvist has written an article about. And all this are described in the legends. And he concludes that these beings are disappearing, and with them the poetry that created them, which in turn influenced the cultural life. Then the collection work that took place in the late 1960s and later showed that older people still had extensive knowledge of Faroese folklore, and which could be documented and archived. But the classic Faroese folklore has not been supplemented with this material in print, so it's only you can only find it in the archives of the Faroese folklore archives, so people do not know so much about them. In this presentation, I will try to supplement the classical accounts with some of the more recently collected material. We have, first of all, we have the Hultefolk, which is the hidden people, the supranational beings which are most akin to human beings are the Hultefolk, the hidden people. The Hultefolk lived in a parallel supranational world where the human being and Hultefolk could be mutually attracted and cross the boundaries of each other. They are parts of invisible hidden girls sleeping in the marital bed between husband and wife without the wife knowing about this. I know I have collected them from Gasadauer, several of those stories. There was a cooperation in the field of activity just as wide as that of human beings, both on land and on sea. There are legends telling of men who fished alongside Hultemen and that they competed for landing places and boathouses with them. And the Hultefolk could give warnings of good or evil to come, even fishing. Hultonate, the hidden sea cattle, were owned by the hidden people and is often mixed with the Seanade or the sea cattle, as I mentioned it. In a legend in Hammershaim's Anthology from 1891, it is told that the sea cattle or sea cow look like other cows, but give much more milk. People were therefore keen to have these cows. Sometimes on 12th night, the 8th of January, they were found in byres along with the other cows. Even the sign of the cross were made on their backs. The sea cows stayed quietly among the others. In the material collected after 1967, we also find accounts of sea cattle and accounts of sea bulls that have been mating with cows on land, and the result being a calf with horse hair on its back, but otherwise a very good calf who could data mate with the originally Faroese cow. So we still have hidden cows in the Faroes. The hidden people closely resembled ordinary humans in every way, but they were also supranational beings that were neither human or animals. Also, we have also beings, hybrid beings, with not in other creatures, and one of them was the Nikur. The Nikur, a water elf, or you call it Nix in English, is a freshwater being and living on the bed of a lake. It can appear in rivers, lakes, and on land near the lake in a variety of shapes, such as a beautiful little horse or young man. It could also change itself into other cute four-footed animals to attract people. If you touch a nix, you stick fast to it and are drawn to the lake. It was fantastically strong, but a human being could only gain control over it by making the sign of a cross on its back or give it a proper name. Then it lost its magical power. Hammershaimb has a story from the lake Leidesvatn or the island of War, and Jakob Jakobsen has from Eje and a lot of variants from other places. The point of these stories is that children became trapped by the nix and were only freed after the children said something that could be mistaken for a naming. In one case, the child came to use a nickname, Nika, in another, and the child that had given a fatty blubber said, "Du skalt ikke snika me," which means something like, "You shall not put grease on me." And Niga and Snika was the same of a Nikur, so he got a name and lost its power. That is the story. There is a tale from the village of Tofter, which my mother-in-law told me, where some children had touched the Nix and become trapped and were on their way down to the lake, but were rescued in the last moment because a man succeeded in carving a cross in a piece of wood over turf, which then he threw after the children who escaped the Nick. And there are several examples of stone dikes and wakes of walls of churchyards made from stones, which people who had got control of the Nix had forced him to pull. He pulled the stones with a strong tail, and the accounts from the villages of Húsavík on Sandoy and Øruvik on Suðuroy, where two different women managed to exploit the Nix to drag those buildings material. Another being is the Marmenil. Marmenil is the oldest Nordic name for merman. The only published account of Marmenil is in Hammersheim's anthology from 1891 in the village of Eldevik. It resembled a human being, but had exceptionally long fingers. It teased the fishermen by eating the bait from their hooks, or by fixing the hooks into the seabed so that the fishermen lines break. If it gets caught itself, it could quickly lose the hook. Nevertheless, the farmer Anfinnur in Eldevik caught a marmenil and took it on board his boats, made the sign of the cross over it, and got the power of the marmenil, and used the marmenil for good fishing, until in some way it got the opportunity to disappear. In the material collected in the 1960s, there is still many documented about marmenil, but all the stories are not published. Another being is the sjódregil. It is a mixture of a human and animal that lives by the shore and in the sea. It's a sea monster. The sjódregil is mentioned in Tarnovius' book from 1669. It sits, he tells us, in the evening and at the night on the cliffs. And the villages it's also in the new material that is called Suibnatenga, which in translated to English is something like the spirit of a tongue of land. It is common that to all these accounts that the sjódregil appears in the phosphoric lights. So we have still a lot of tales about the sjódregil in the new collected material from the 60s. In many villages, children were told about the dangerous sjódregil to prevent them from moving too close to the dangerous shoreline. In other words, it was also a pedagogical fiction to make the children afraid. And we have also Hafrik, the mermaid. According to the description of Hammersheim Anthropology from 1999, a mermaid is a human above the waist and fish below, and she had a fair hair spread in the water. Another word for a mermaid was sævarkvinna. It's the same as a sea woman. The mermaid was acting as a presager, or if she turned toward, and if she turned toward the boat, that meant bad weather, and they had to row home quickly. If the mermaid was accompanied by her merman, the weather would be good. The mermaid could also sing, and the singing presaged terrible weather. The people did their best to stop the singing and to prevent the bad weather. The mermaid was harmless, but the singing was very dangerous. And something I forgot got a mixture about the show drill. It's a mixing of paper. But with the show drill, as I mentioned before, it was the show drill. It was another experiment now. Yeah, the show drill was called Sugnatenga, and I called it. But this part of the show drill, it was living at the shore side and the glitters all over and giving us sparks and shows to the boat that the rowing past saying row, row, boat, row, row, boats. Then the boat had to row there. Ambers has a legend about the show drill in his anthology from 1999, where he described it with a long foot or a fish tail, but it can make long hops and it leaves traces in the snow. The legend tells that sometimes had been taken on board a boat and forced to row the boat because the show drill was a very strong and good in finding fish. But it could also only function in the twilight and the darkness. As soon as it begins to be light and the sun rises, it gets smaller and at last disappears. Attempts to keep it on board by making the cross over it did not work. It disappeared anyway. The show drill was able to change its appearance, could bark like a dog or make several sounds that could be heard far away. If somebody met the show drill ashore, it tries to force the human to the sea, but if the human had a dog with it, it was no danger because the show drill was afraid of dogs. As I mentioned, there's several collections of new accounts of show drill in the 1960 material, and a lot of memorized of people who remember the accounts with the show drill ashore under the sea in very different circumstances. So all those old creatures which Hammersmith were dead are still living when I was a student. And then what you also mentioned in the former lecture, the stories of seal that once a year came ashore to become human for a night is well known, and a legend about a sea woman in Mikladalur is one of the best known legends in the Faroes. It has become the subject of both drama and film, and is the longest legend in Hammershim's anthology. The action takes place in the village of Mikladalur, where a young man had heard that the seals come ashore on 12th night, 8th of January. Then they take off their skins and dance and enjoy themselves in the form of human beings. He hides and watches the dancing. He fell in love with a seal woman and prevents her from returning to the sea when the sun rises. He takes the skin home and she goes to with him. He marries her and they have children. But she wants to go to the sea again. One day, the man is at fishing and has forgotten the key to the chest where he kept the seal skin. He puts it on, or she takes it from the chest and puts it on and disappears to the sea, but leaves the children back. As a seal, she sometimes comes back from the sea to look at her children playing on the land. One night she begs her former husband in a dream not to kill the big seal and some young seals because they are the young of her mate and herself. Her former husband pays no attention to the kills both the males and ate both the males and the young. Later in the evening, when the seal meat is being prepared in the peasant's house, the seal woman comes in the kitchen looking like a most hideous troll and swears to take revenge on the whole village. In revenge, so many of the people of Mikladalur will die in accidents or at cliffs and on air or of the sea, that at the end they will be able to hold hands in a ring around the Kalsoy. The legend of the seal woman in Mikladalur is only published once. Since then, they have collected several other variations of the legends of selkies or seals, small seals from other villages, which not have been published but still are in archives. The most dramatic one of this is that the selkie left home and the seal woman or selkie left home and jumped into the sea. And at that time, she was pregnant by her human husband and gave birth to two twins after reaching the sea. So when her former husband ate the selkies or the small seals, he ate his own children. He became a cannibal. So it's a very dramatic part of the legend, but it has not been published yet. The phenomenon of fjörutröll, the shore trolls, is only known from the village of Hattarvík on Folklore and is among Jakob Jakobsen's legends. The shore troll was an ugly troll that lived down at the beach where it was heard in the evenings. It was monstrous to see, a lot of seaweed grow on it, and it brought a lot of stones up it. And as the whole couple yard was loose and being ground down under his feet. This troll was so big that it was higher than the ridge of the roof of the house. And when the sea troll once tried to enter the house, the residents were terrified, but a skilled man in dealing with trolls managed to stop it, and since that, it has never been seen again. And in addition to this legend, other variants had been collected about fjörutröll in Hattarvík in the 60s, and still unpublished. So it's a lot of material to publish yet. And another supernatural being that has also been extensively treated in folklore literature and also dealt with by as the Swedish folklorist mentioned before, it's a Niagrusur, or Lönnqvist. That is a ghost of illegitimate, unbaptized children, often murdered in birth. It was a shapeless creature which haunts people, haunts most of their parents, until it received a Christian name. It was not a specific water spirit, but in the village of Gásadalur, it was said to stay under the bridge of the river Gásadalur, and I have personally documented one of the last accounts of Niagrusur. An old man in Gásadalur told me that how he experienced it between his legs, saying something when it disappeared in the river again, and that was told in 1967. In the folkloristic material collected in the 1960s, even other supernatural beings appear, such as the cattokveller or the cat whales, which is said to make sounds like a cat, and which is said to come close to the bows at the sea, and it's also mixed with what you call a tröllakvel, troll whale, and here also the Tjörnuböka. It's a most interesting whale, a very big whale with a pond on its back, so big that there was room for a rowing boat in it. Another informant says that the whale could make a pond by curling itself up and biting its own tail around the boat. And there are also accounts of a supernatural flundra, a supernatural helibots back on both sides, which also was a pre-sayer. In recent years, many of the supernatural beings have been given an artistic expression in the form of statues erected at the places where they are associated with, and become tourist attractions. The most famous being undoubtedly the seal woman in Mygladal, and also the Faroese author who also is an artist, William Heinesen, has painted a lot of this creature in his illustration. So if I should have illustration, I would have taken all those from William Heinesen. So it is you can see a lot of that. But all these this is a part of the old thing. But in newer times, all of the supernatural beings that I have been mentioned is so far belonging to the Faroese peasant society and to the Faroese village cosmos. At the end of the 19th century, more changes took place in the Faroese society. Commercial fishing now became the most important industry of the Faroes, and most of the Faroese men became deep sea fishermen and sailors. And from 1872, the Faroes brought many old smacks from England and Scotland, and with these ships, many forms of superstition arose and board the Faroese fishing, especially to the phenomena of fishing luck. And even, I've written it in a lot of my papers, even a new supernatural being came to the Faroes, which in other maritime context better known as the Klabauterman. It was completely unknown in the Faroe Islands until the advent of the deep sea fishery and the smacks. The material concerned in this was collected as a part of one of my own research projects in the 1970s. But prior to that, it was only dealt with in literature in form of 2 short stories. It is evident from the analysis of the whole body of the material that the fishermen could see and at times also hear the men on board, as it's called in the Faroes. They could usually hear him trimming the salt in the hold at night, from which he also got the name Lemparen, or in English, the trimmer. They could hear it fishing from the deck at nights. It could see him working with the seals, and if the boat went down or ran aground, it disappeared to the sea and was never seen again. The men on board was believed to have been on board the smacks before they came to the Faroes. The reason for this being on board might be a murder, an accident, or death by chance. The men on board acted as a presager and furnished the crew with important information such as warning of danger, of stormy weather, of running aground, warned about collision with other ships, and of the latrine going out, and as letting them know that fishing was an offering. In short, he provided the crew with some of the information for acquisition of which more advanced electronic equipment is used today. It's a parallel. There are also accounts of women being on board, but their role is very unclear. The reason for their presence on board is that they had died on board for some reason or another. Nevertheless, a few years ago, it was said that a supernatural woman occasionally appeared on board the ferry between Tórshavn and Toftir. I have heard told, a lot believed it. And so the old form of supernatural tradition has disappeared and changed in other forms as society has changed. The newest forms are mostly about super normal communication in dreams or connection with persons who are on their way or already cross over to the other side, or staying in a limbo on the border between the other side and the real world. But that is another story, but it's a very interesting story. And from my youth, I remember stories about a necklace man, an English soldier from the Second World War in my home district, who was said to appear in a certain place, and we were haunting it every night as I was a youngster. And today you hear a lot of stories about deceased traffic victims who appear in cars at certain places in the country road. And another thing I think is very interesting, as much as the old forms of folklore and information, is that we today have another hidden wars in the form of cyberspace using iPhones and other equipment. But it's not unlike information we had for. But the functional equivalent analyst to this area, that is another story, and it has to wait another time. Thank you.
Thank you, Jóan. So, some fascinating tales there as well, and it's great to see how the folklore has changed over time, as well as society has changed, and yet a desire for sort of supernatural explanations, it continues, and it morphs and changes into new forms. It's also really interesting that there's still stories to be collected in the Faroe Islands, and still stories to be published. I mean, it'd be really interesting to read the Selkie wife stories that haven't been published yet. That would be really fascinating. I wonder, Terry Gunnell did an extraordinary a survey of sort of belief in the supernatural in Iceland. I don't know, it's about 15 years ago now, and then it became very popular because then everyone believed that the Icelanders believed in elves. But he did this big survey to explore supernatural belief. Has anything like that been done in the Faroe Islands?
But once again,
have you undertaken a survey of supernatural belief in the Faroe Islands, like Terry Gunnell did in Iceland?
No, it's not. There's also it's what you call it, som skriver om it's a book published about seals in the Faroe Islands. But it's not done so much research. It's a woman. I don't remember the name at the moment, but she's published. It's a book published where they put it into international context. But I don't know. It's not been so much research. It's on the published material and in comparison of it. But I don't think we should have a new what you call it excavation of mines to publish all the materials that is still in the archives, but nobody had looked at it since it was collected. So we have a work to do to read it through. I hope that some young students will take upon them the work to do that.
Well, I'm sure there will be volunteers because it sounds like wonderful material that you have there. I was also interested in the names of some of the beings that you have in the Faroe Islands. We have some of the same names. So although the most common supernatural being in Shetland is called Thrau, there are other names for the Thralls. Yeah. There are other names that you find in the sources. So lots of the recorded stories, they talk about hill folk. And these are our equivalent of the Huldra folk, the hidden people. Yeah. It's so that was a name that was known. And also your Nick from Leitisvatn, we have Nugels.
Would you call it English Nick?
Well, in Nugel in Shetland. Nugel. Yeah. Or Kelpie on the mainland of Scotland. But Nugels, yeah. So there's a lot of stories about Nugels. And there's that Shouldrail. That's a fascinating being that you've got, and interesting stories. We don't have that, but there was a story from Orkney in the 16th century about a creature called a troikis, and it comes out of the sea and it's covered in seaweed, and it makes love to a farmer's wife for a year, although she doesn't want it to, before the minister manages to get rid of it. And it seems to be a survival of some Old Norse idea of the draugur, the revenant dead, or somebody who's died at sea who's coming back. But I must do some more reading about the showdreel. He sounds fascinating.
But the new all the new stories about it. He's called a name of Suimen Atenga. It's another name, but it's the same creature, and it's so many years. It's about 50 years ago since I saw that material. So, but I think I will look at it again. It's very interesting to publish it in some new stories to supplement the. Hammersheim and Jakobsson's materials. That is the only, but because it's a growing interest in all those, because even in every village they have a monument about the hidden man, Hulteman, in Sandavavur and the lake in near the airplane. It's a horse making the nikur. And so it's all over. So it's a growing interest. So I hope that we can get the stories back again.
Fascinating. Yeah. Oh, Simon's got his hand up. Hello, Simon.
Simon, that's just a name. Simon on the Yes.
I have a question about. I mean, obviously these are originating oral tradition. And were designed or were traditionally modified according to the audience and the context that the stories were being told in. I wonder how the way these stories are understood and propagated has changed as society has become widely literate. Has that changed the character of these stories and actually become part of the way these have been incorporated into the sort of the modern world, or has it kind of killed it? Has it sort of fossilized it in a way?
I know most of the old Jakobsson and Hammersheim stories, they are now not so much folk beliefs, but it's a part of as a fictional. I think people most think it's fictional. It's a part, you can see it as a dramatic, you can see it even when you got all the statues around the Faroes. It is entering a tourist object to tell about it. So it's fictional, and it's, of course, they have changed a little bit, but I think most of the old hybrid creatures or beings which belong to the old peasants, Faroese society, they have disappeared. They are in the same shape as they always have been. And you tell about them, but all the new, if you've read new, it's something. It's a only ghost. It is most superstition about ordinary people who are dead, and you see in dreams. So it is not a supernatural creature, but it is people from the ordinary world who live in something else. So in the hidden side, and even if you know that it is you have a lot of films about it. I have a daughter who sometimes he wrote an examination essay on fiction in films and on the and you can see the same things you say in film, almost the same thing as you can say in old times telling. And even you have the Lego, the play, they have a series they call The Hidden Side. So even the children can play with such supernatural things in the playings. It is called The Hidden Side. You can buy it or. So it's still but it's more functional, not so much in a belief, but you can also and what is my personal interest is much of it's a functional equivalent to all the interest in people have information. So in former time, the information you got by supernatural is in fact the same needs you can get today by modern equipment in cyberspace. And so it's the same needs what you have before. So needs are the same, but you have other things to know. But it's quite another problem.
Thank you very much, Jóan. Well, just before we finish, was there anything in the Shetland material that struck a chord with you?
Oh, so it's very much lots of likeness between the Shetland and Faroe. So I have not been all this. It's only a part of my research is on such things as other things. But I think if I was not old, I will take it up again. I try to also. I will look at it. It's very interesting.
I'll certainly be reading some more Hammersheim material from the Faroe Islands, and of course, good old Jakob Jakobsson, who did so much for Shetland's culture. Without him, we would have lost a huge amount. And well, I think we'll maybe just draw it to an end there. Thank you very much, Jóan Pauli. It was wonderful to see you and to hear about Faroese folklore and to share some Shetland folklore with you. And it just goes to show the close the similarities between the cultural heritage of the two archipelagos, and yet the slight differences as well. There's a shared element and there's a unique elements as well. But we're both very lucky to have such rich folklore traditions. So thank you very much indeed. And we'll leave it there.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.